people are waking up, and the message should be heard loud and clear. And a lot of times people will get discouraged. How are we ever going to change Congress? It's difficult. We've been trying, you, me, I've been up there for a long time. How many bills have you passed? Well, I'd hate to be measured by the number of bills I pass if I had to pass some of the bills that I can't stand even voting for. So what we need obviously is a lot less of these bills and more and a lot less of them intrusion into our civil liberties. But the military tribunals, are a real detriment. It actually takes a citizen out and puts them into a military tribunal. Now this last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of talk about the Supreme Court. Will the Supreme Court uphold the Obamacare? And who knows? My prediction is it'll be a mushy type of recording, because quite honestly and technically, the whole bill ought to be thrown out, not just the name. But when you think about the comments and the derision of the president, because he was talking about the Supreme Court, trying to influence the Supreme Court, and he had a lot of criticism directed in his direction, and that's understandable. But to me, that's rather minor compared to him taking over the judicial system and arresting people and saying that he can put people in prison, for life without even a turning. When they accept these things, that to me is a much more vicious violation than the president making some comments. And it isn't like it was the first time. I'm sure all of you remember FDR, when he wanted to pack the courts. So that's been around for a long time. But what we need is the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative branch reading the Constitution and obeying it. Yeah. There was a bill passed. It's called the Defense Production Act, and it literally legalized an emergency powers to the president in time of war to take over all industry. If you read it, it's terrifying. But fortunately, it hasn't been used. Piecemeal, it has been on occasion, but it hasn't really been used to take over the entire economy. But this last month, instead of the Congress renewing it, the president did it with an executive order. And it wasn't just renewing it. What he did was he changed a few things. Instead of emergency powers during wartime, he changed it to emergency powers anytime, even in peacetime. So why in the world would he be doing this? I thought we were supposed to be the government, and the Congress is supposed to be the government. Why are we allowing our presidents and executive branch to do so much? And this is to me why we are approaching a crisis, but we can change things. Two examples that I can use that, in spite of the difficulty and maybe some pessimism about what can be done. I'm sure a lot of you know about Stop Online Piracy Act, right? You know that one?
Yes.
That's the attack. That was the bill that would have attacked the internet, control the internet. I mean, they have everything else, and the internet's still pretty free, so the government wants to take over. So they had the votes in the House and the Senate. And then there was an organized effort by the people to let their congressmen don't vote for this, and they removed it from the we had all the Republicans support it. We passed it in the House of Representatives. The final version was watered down. We had a partial audit. But the fact that it passed the House was a response not by me twisting arms, because I don't have political or legislative clout in Washington. But the people who knew about it got hold of their congressmen and legitimately twisted their arms as they vote for the audit of the Federal Reserve. reflection of the people. If we're complacent and we're just quite willing to give up our freedoms in an incremental way, then it's going to continue that way. But when people get fed up and send a message, the politicians in Washington, sometimes they don't have a whole lot of strong beliefs. I don't know if you ever recognize that or not. But they do want to stay in office. So if you can't get them out of office and think they should be out of office, put the pressure on where they think they could lose, and they will come your way in order to change their viewpoints. And this is, I think, what's going to happen. I think the country is waking up. It is so different. The politicians I know and the other candidates, I think they're well-intentioned, but I don't think they're hearing the people. People in Washington, I don't think they hear the people. If they did, they'd cut spending a little bit, and they would quit running up these deficits. The American people right now, 80% of the American people said, you know, you've had your chance. You've been in Afghanistan for 10 years. It's time to come home from Afghanistan. No, we need more and more and more, and we have to be in Syria, we have to go into Iran, and on and on. But if that's going to end, and I tell people who disagree with me on the policy, they think that we should be there and have to be there, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to work that way because the money is running out. And all great nations who overextend themselves overseas are always brought down for financial reasons, and that's what we're on the verge of doing. Fortunately, that crisis that we put up with in the 60s, when there were missiles in Cuba and I was drafted, we didn't have to resolve that with a nuclear exchange. They had 30,000 nuclear weapons, but their system failed. So our system eventually will fail. And the fact that the Soviets had that much and they were that dangerous and they were a hard-line bunch of people to deal with, but here we're getting, people are beating the war drums to start using weaponry and using force to go into Iran. And they don't even have a weapon. Nobody's even proved that they've worked on it. Yes, they're bad actors, and you can't trust them. But North Korea is probably much worse than the Iranians, and they do have nuclear weapons. So it just doesn't add up. And just remember, the Soviets collapsed not because we had to fight them. They collapsed because they overextended themselves. So our greatest danger is here at home. Nobody's going to invade this country. That's one thing that we know. Our military we have to think seriously about how we got off track. And I think it occurred about 100 years ago. The one thing that happened is that the consensus was that liberty had two parts to it. The founders never understood this because liberty was liberty. It was your life, it was your liberty, it was your property. Life, liberty, and property, fruits of your labor, they all belong to you. And your personal liberty, your religious liberty, your social liberties were the same as your economic liberties. But in the last 50, 60 years, we've had a group saying, well, economic liberty is one thing, but I have to tell you what to do with your own body and what you can smoke and drink and everything else. And what you're supposed to restore liberty and responsibility to individuals. If you're free to make your decisions for your own life and your own property or your own money, you have to suffer the consequences. You can't go to the government and your neighbor and say you're going to take care of it because I messed up. Freedom is one issue. It should be the same thing. And the reason why it should invite people to come together, left, right, center, independent, everybody should come together. It shouldn't have anything to do with race, color, creed, sex, or anything else or religion. Because if you understand liberty and you understand your right to your life, you can use your life as you want. But you don't have a right to tell somebody else how to do theirs. But you have to tolerate the way they spend their money and the way they run their personal affairs as long as they don't hurt anybody.
That's right.
Now that should bring us... Not because we agree on how to spend our money. But we all want that right to our life and our liberty. So that should bring us together. And some people will tell me, yeah, that's good, but you know, some people, if you give them that much liberty, they're going to misuse that liberty, and they're going to do things that, boy, I just don't consent to, and that means I would be consenting to those individuals that are doing this. No, you're not. Just because you allow people their freedom, you don't endorse what they do. You don't endorse people's religion. Somebody might be an atheist because you believe in freedom of choice. You don't endorse their atheism or whatever religion they pick. You just endorse the freedom to choose. That should bring us all together. Right. Make up their own minds about it, recognize all the dangers, and if there are going to be regulations regulating substances like they regulate alcohol, that's certainly permissible under the Constitution. But I've thought a whole lot about the federal war on drugs. I've thought a lot about drugs. Drugs as a consequence in medicine and as a consequence of illegality and people that are addicted. I am convinced of one thing certain. The danger of individuals using illegal drugs today is minor compared to the danger of the federal war on drugs. Since the 1970s, we spent about $3 trillion, not well spent. But the whole effort, it expands. You know, the idea of having a war on drugs leads to the point where up until after World War II, in this country, there was an industrial product that we raised and had a lot of jobs and made a lot of products, but we're not allowed to do it. That's growing hemp is illegal in this country. No reason at all. That the federal government has to tell you whether or not you can drink raw milk. I happen to think that I personally don't drink raw milk, and but I think it's a freedom issue. If somebody wants to drink raw milk, why do we have somebody in Washington D.C. telling you you're not allowed to do it? Why do we put up with the government telling us what kind of light bulbs we have to buy? I'm convinced that I'm not going to be an optimist forever unless we do something about the TSA, how they grow us. Thank you. A lot of people will tell us that we're going back to the dark ages by wanting to have a gold standard and the free markets and all. But I'll tell you what, those people who oppose the message of liberty, I think they are the past. I think those of us who talk about the future are talking about liberty. The future is liberty, not tyranny and not big government.